Hi everyone, Carl here, and I hope you're all doing great. Today I'm going to continue building the half-timbered ruin for Mordheim and Frostgrave, which I started in the previous video. Last week I made a corner section. Today I'm going to make a floor section and some beams, and link up two wall sections to make a two-story building. In my next video I will add a part of a roof to it, so if that sounds like your kind of thing, make sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss it. I started off with a 3-wall section to give my building a stable base with a small footprint. Not sure if I'll add an actual base yet, but this will help prevent the building from toppling over. This section was built exactly like the one in the previous video, so we're not going to waste any time on that. To build a system of beams, I cut out a long strip of XPS foam, about 5x5mm, then started cutting smaller bits out of it. I start with a diagonal beam, which I want to go from one corner to roughly the center of the room. Fun fact, this kind of beam is called a dragon beam in half-timber architecture. If I understood correctly, you would not find this configuration of beams supporting a floor, but it looks nice, and I like my terrain the way I like my conspiracy theories. Baseless and only loosely connected to reality. Once I had a dragon beam, I started to lay out the beams running to the posts on the walls. I cut 45-degree angles by lining up the XPS with one of the corners on my cutting mat, and then slicing through the opposite corner. Then I trimmed the beams to length, textured them using the back of my knife, and glued and pinned them to the dragon beam. To close the gaps between the posts, I cut 2 cm sections and glued them in between the beams. This was kind of a mistake. You see, the posts on the walls are exactly 5mm wide and exactly 2 cm apart. However, the beams are cut by hand and there are inaccuracies, so I ended up with an offset. What I should have done is glue the beams in one place on the wall first, and then cut these fillers to the available space. Lesson learned. To finish off the beams, I also added in a few more broken ones to support the floor. Now you might be thinking, why did I make these beams so complex if they're going to be hidden by the floor? Well, the main reason was that I wasn't sure how to build them, and I want to add an exposed set of beams on the upper floor. Since these are going to be hidden, they're a good place to practice. Next, I made a border to hide the edges of the floor from the outside. It's just 3 pieces of 5x5mm foam laid over the beams, with the mating edges cut to 45-degree angles. This part also serves a useful in-game purpose. It offsets the wall from the floor, so I still have the full height of the story to put miniatures in if I add another additional floor on top. To make the floor, I took 2 thin pieces of foam and divided them into 5mm wide floorboards. Then I drew staggered lines across to represent individual floorboards. Since a large piece of this building is missing, I wanted the floor to be broken, so I marked the area which is still supported by beams and cut off the unsupported part. Then I trimmed away some of the boards which would have fallen off, since a board is unlikely to break clean off. Before I glued the floorboards in place, I textured the wood grain on them with the back of my knife, and then pinned and glued the walls I made last week. Finally, I gave the interior walls a thin coat of filler. I first brushed on some water and then spread the filler on the inside, trying not to get too much of it on the front. This will add some weight and strength to the structure, as well as hiding any gaps from the inside. This step would have been much easier if I had done it before I glued the beams and the floors in, but with a bit of attention it's possible not to make a mess. Besides, this is a ruin, so I can always hide any serious mistakes under debris. And that's it for this part of the build. Skirmish games like Mordheim and Frostgrave really play best in 3 dimensions, so I like to put some thought into my terrain in order to support this. This building already allows movement through the ground floor in one direction, as well as providing an elevated position for snipers. It also has a long open edge on the upper floor, which gives a lot of options for connecting it to other buildings using walkways. I hope you enjoyed watching this video, and that you will join me for the next one where I add a roof on the building. Thank you for watching, stay safe and have a great day.